Tonight, we drift toward a sleepy little island wrapped in fog and arguments. You're in the Pacific Northwest, somewhere between the elbow of Washington State and the wild eyebrow of Vancouver Island. The air is damp with pine, the seagulls are screaming like they just stubbed their toes, and you're about to step into one of the most ridiculous, almost wars in history. It's the kind of place where nothing much should happen, except maybe a sheep bleating in the distance, or a bad batch of moonshine. But on this otherwise unassuming patch of green called San Juan Island, one plump British pig, rooting through potatoes, nearly triggered a full-scale war between the United States and the British Empire. Yes, you heard right, a pig, not a spy pig, not a nuclear pig, just a hungry pig with no sense of property lines. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're watching this from anywhere across the globe, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where everyone's drifting off from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're trudging up a muddy hill in 1859. It's June, the kind of grey day where everything feels soggy, including your socks and your sense of international peace. You're on the American side of San Juan Island, sort of. The problem is, no one's entirely sure what side anything is. That's the issue. But right now, you're standing near the humble farm of Lyman Cutler, an American settler with a potato patch, and an unfortunate neighbour, a very British pig. The pig, belonging to the Hudson's Bay Company's Charles Griffin, has a habit of waddling into Cutler's land and feasting like it's an all-you-can-eat buffet. Potatoes vanish again and again. Cutler complains again and again. Griffin doesn't care, the pig blissfully ignorant, until one morning it pushes its luck too far. You're watching from behind a shrub as Cutler, fuming and fed up, raises his musket. One shot, one squeal, one pig down. Now here's where it goes sideways. Griffin is furious. That pig, he insists, was valuable, a fine specimen, a British subject even. He demands $100 in compensation, about $3,500 in today's coin. Cutler, squinting through his bad week, offers $10. They do not shake hands. Instead, word gets out. A British subject has been murdered. Well, a pig, but hey, nationalism comes in many forms. British officials threaten to arrest Cutler. American settlers call for US military protection. And, like a clumsy game of telephone, whispers of arrest turn into invasion, then into imminent war. Historians still argue whether Griffin intentionally used the pig to provoke the Americans or if he just had terrible livestock fencing. Either way, you've now witnessed a moment when a farmer, a pig, and a potato patch created a diplomatic powder keg. As twilight sets in, both governments thousands of miles away begin tuning in. Telegrams buzz, ambassadors fret. It's 1859, remember, neither side wants another war. But out here in this foggy corner of nowhere, local tempers are hotter than a campfire coffee pot. And you're right in the middle of it. Welcome to San Juan Island, where the next 12 years are about to get very awkward. You wake the next morning to the low rumble of distant waves and a breeze that smells faintly of cedar and seaweed. The mist clings to your eyelashes like a damp veil. San Juan Island doesn't seem like the sort of place where international conflict should take root. It's quiet, remote, dotted with pine trees, a few grazing sheep and log cabins whose chimneys puff lazy columns of wood smoke into the sky. But beneath this pastoral calm lies a tension thicker than the mud on your boots. San Juan sits at the heart of an awkward geopolitical custody battle. You look to your left toward the hulking outline of Vancouver Island, claimed proudly by the British Crown. Then glance right to the more rugged mainland shores of Washington Territory, humming with American expansionist ambition. You're standing on the green bone between two territorial teeth, and both empires are gnashing. Why San Juan? Well, it's not because of its dazzling nightlife or five-star inns. It's because the island and its surrounding archipelago command key access to the Strait of Juan de Fuca, which in turn leads to Puget Sound, which in turn holds commercial value. And power, as always, follows the trade winds. Both Britain and the United States covet this strategic prize. There's also the not-so-small matter of Hudson's Bay Company operations here. The British claim a long-standing presence through their company's posts and piggish investments. The Americans counter with settlers like Cutler, who've arrived under the blessing of the Donation Land Claim Act. Each side believes they're the rightful sovereign, planting gardens, raising flags and glaring across picket fences. You stroll toward Bellevue Sheep Farm, where British shepherds tend flocks with a kind of passive-aggressive decorum. Their tea breaks are rigid, their boots polished, their sheep oddly well-mannered. Nearby, American settlers gather in communal barns, trading stories, tools, and deep-seated suspicions about those redcoats over the hill. The truth is, no one's quite sure whose land this is. The 1846 Oregon Treaty, meant to draw a clear line between British and American holdings, left the boundary through these islands as vague as a drunk cartographer's doodle. It simply said, the border would run through the middle of the channel, which channel, though there are two, Haro Strait to the west, Rosario Strait to the east. Each side picked the one that favored them. You can see how that might be a problem. Historians still debate whether the treaty's language was the result of diplomatic compromise or just sloppy legal drafting over warm brandy. Either way, it left San Juan Island sitting squarely in the grey zone. The land was disputed, but that didn't stop settlers from claiming it like toddlers arguing over toy blocks. And so tension simmers. You hear British officers refer to Americans as squatters. You hear Americans accuse the British of imperial bullying. There are no bullets yet, just insults, icy stares, and maps brandished like weapons. It's a strange Cold War before the Cold War, a foggy chessboard where no one quite knows whose move it is. But don't be fooled by the quiet. Each chopped log, each planted turnip, each snort from a sheep is a political statement now. Both sides know that control over this island could tilt future negotiations in their favor. And no one, absolutely no one, is willing to blink first. You pass a settler reading the Bible on his porch, a musket leaning beside him like a nervous dog. He nods as you pass, murmuring something about pigs and destiny. You're beginning to suspect that the line between comedy and catastrophe is thinner than the morning fog. And somewhere across the misty channel, another message is being sent to another commanding officer. More men are coming. Soon San Juan won't be just fields and farms. It will be tents, bayonets, gunboats, all for an island whose native inhabitants, foxes, gulls, and yes, pigs, are blissfully unaware of the flag soon to be raised in their meadows. By the time you dry off from that relentless island drizzle and find a stump to sit on, you're wondering how this whole thing even got so blurry. The pig, the potatoes, the escalating tempers, they all seem rooted in something deeper. So you pull out a figurative magnifying glass and examine the paper trail. It's 1846. The United States and Great Britain, tired of bickering over who gets what in the Pacific Northwest, finally settle on the Oregon Treaty. You imagine diplomats in frock coats sweating under chandeliers, scribbling terms while sipping brandy, hoping this inked document will end decades of colonial one-upmanship. But then you read the treaty's text and, oh no. The border between British and American territory, it says, will run along the 49th parallel to the middle of the channel, which separates the continent from Vancouver's island, and thence southerly through the middle of the said channel. You blink. Middle of which channel? Because like a sloppy riddle, the channel in question could mean Haro Strait or Rosario Strait, and depending on which one you pick, San Juan Island either belongs to the British or to the Americans. Cue the headache. Historians still argue whether this vagueness was deliberate. Some say it was a convenient fudge neither side could agree, so they chose strategic ambiguity and figured they'd sort it out later. Others claim it was genuine confusion. That 19th century cartography just wasn't up to the task of drawing accurate maritime boundaries in remote fog-covered archipelagos. Either way, it's the bureaucratic equivalent of handing two kids the same lollipop and saying, share it, figure it out. You walk beside a surveyor now American grumbling into his beard. He's trying to map out a boundary line using old charts, a dodgy compass, and the sun which is stubbornly hiding behind clouds. He points at the Haro Strait and says it's clearly the main channel. A British lieutenant standing a few paces off scoffs and declares, "That's absurd. Rosario is wider, safer, and better documented." And you're starting to think both of them would gladly swap their sextants for swords if it settled the matter. Back in Washington and London, the matter is treated with mild amusement at first. The Oregon Treaty has done its job mostly. The big land grab has been resolved, the prairies been portioned, the 49th parallel respected. It's just the little island San Juan among them that remain in dispute. And compared to the vast American West or the British Empire's globe-spanning map pins, who really cares about a couple hundred square miles of moss mist and pigs? But local settlers do care, and they carry flags in their pockets. You meet a homesteader who plants his tomatoes next to an American flagpole. He insists it's his right under US law. A British customs official rows past and sneers. He claims all land on the island still falls under British jurisdiction. The flagpole, he says, is an illegal provocation. You feel the tension hang in the air like a thundercloud that refuses to break. It doesn't help that both sides send in survey teams. You trail one group of American surveyors through the woods where they argue over measurements, tree lines, and which ridge matches which map. One of them trips over a log and curses the British Crown. Across the island, a team of Royal Navy surveyors is doing the exact same thing, except with more tea breaks and slightly better uniforms. The island becomes a cartographic battleground. Every tree, every inlet, every sheep is sketched, logged, and labelled. You find maps with competing place names, Yankee Bay here, Victoria Cove there. Even the hills start acquiring dual identities, depending on who's drawing them. This is not just land anymore, it's proof of empire. A patch of moss with a flag is worth more than all the potatoes in Cutler's Field. By now, the Oregon Treaty has aged a decade and change. But instead of fading into irrelevance, its most poorly written sentence has become a ticking time bomb. And that pig was the match. You sit at the island's highest point and look down across the forested slopes. It's beautiful here, peaceful, and completely ridiculous, the kind of place where a sheep sneezes and half the continent flinches. You begin to understand that the war that almost happened wasn't born from real aggression, but from indecision, miscommunication, and a treaty written with just enough squishiness to let everyone think they were right, which is never a good combination. The ground under your boots is soft with rain, but the mood on San Juan Island is growing hard and brittle. A place once brushed by sheep hooves and settlers' shovels now echoes with the shuffle of boots and the occasional clink of bayonets. The Americans have had enough. After news of Lyman Cutler's porcine altercation spreads, US military officials respond with the kind of overconfidence that tends to trail empires. They send troops, not a lot at first, but just enough to raise eyebrows and tensions. The 9th Infantry lands on the island like it's their own backyard barbecue. You watch them arrive. Their uniforms are stained with trail dust, but their chins are held high. They pitch tents beside potato fields and string up the stars and stripes like it's already been voted on. Meanwhile, the settlers beam. Finally, they say some real authority around here. Across the island, the British are not pleased. Soon, Royal Navy ships appear offshore, cutting clean lines in the morning fog like sharks through bathwater. They anchor, deliberately close their cannons pointed casually toward the American encampment, as if to say, "Lovely weather, but do try behaving." Aboard one vessel, the HMS Satellite, the crew leans over the rails watching the Americans with what can only be described as professional curiosity. You get the sense they've seen foolish things before, but this one involves a pig potatoes and muskets, and that's a first. It all feels like a 19th century version of a bar fight about to erupt in extreme slow motion. No one throws the first punch, but everyone's flexing. Tensions ratchet up even among the island's inhabitants. One morning you pass a saloon, if you can call a plank-covered shack that. Inside, settlers whisper rumors of imminent war. They say British Marines are about to storm the potato fields. Someone saw a Union soldier polishing a bayonet with purpose. There's talk of fortifying the northern cliffs, talk of arrests, talk of spies. You sip your watery ale and nod politely, wondering how long until someone fires a shot they can't take back. But the strangest part, life keeps going. Sheep are still sheared, children still play with sticks that double as pretend muskets. A mailboat brings news from the mainland, most of it outdated and unhelpful. You feel suspended between war, and nothing like someone jammed the needle between radio stations. Then you walk through the American camp at dusk. Fires crackle. Soldiers joke and drink from battered tin mugs. The commanding officer, Captain George Pickett, yes, that Pickett, the one who will later become infamous for charging into a meat grinder at Gettysburg, sits polishing his boots, proud as a cat on a windowsill. He's new here, but already convinced of the island's American destiny. He believes the British are bluffing. He calls their warships floating lawn ornaments. Historians still debate how serious the threat of real violence was at this point. Some say the war was truly inches away, that one drunk soldier, one nervous sentry could have lit the fuse. Others claim it was posturing from start to finish, that cooler heads would always prevail. But standing there between two camps with muskets oiled and tempers frayed, it feels like anything could tip the balance. You climb to the middle ridge where an unofficial border has formed. British Marines and American infantry sometimes cross paths here, nodding stiff hellos. You spot a British officer handing a flask to an American one, both men laughing at some private joke about porcine diplomacy. It's surreal, like watching rival hockey teams shake hands before they've even played. And yet beneath the odd civility lies steel. Cannons are being moved into position. Patrols walk longer hours. Each side begins digging in, not with shovels of hate, but with a kind of bureaucratic paranoia. No one wants war, but no one wants to be the one who backs down. It's becoming clear this is no longer about a pig. It's about pride, about flags, about a poorly written treaty and the human tendency to double down on ridiculousness. You lean against a tree and sigh. The sheep across the meadows seem oblivious. Or perhaps they know in their woolly wisdom that humans often find strange reasons to fight over places they barely understand. And as the summer sun fades behind the fog once more, you feel the island itself holding its breath. The sun rises over San Juan Island with all the grace of a yawn. It spills light across dewy grass, catches on tent canvas, and bathes the two opposing camps in a soft gold that makes everything look almost civilized. But the tension is anything but. Today you stand at the invisible line dividing the American camp from British-held territory, where a single dead pig has everyone talking like war is just one awkward handshake away. Let's rewind for a second. The pig was British, the farmer who shot it was American. The pig wandered into a potato patch, did what pigs do, and got itself shot. That should have been the end of it. Some compensation, maybe a sternly worded apology. But no, because what followed was an almost operatic escalation of pride and paperwork. Now you can hear the drums of bureaucracy thudding louder than any actual cannons. The British demand Lyman Cutler's arrest. After all, he's technically trespassing on British land, and he did shoot company property, but the Americans see this as imperial harassment. He's one of ours, they insist. You arrest him, and we'll have problems. That right there is where the kindling gets its first real spark. You stroll past a heated gathering of settlers outside a small post office. Cutler is there, arms folded. His neighbors rally around him. It's not about the pig, one says through clenched teeth. It's about rights. And there it is, that magical alchemy where simple disputes morph into constitutional showdowns. Word reaches the US Army stationed nearby, and soon Captain Pickett arrives with reinforcements. He's dramatic, fond of his own voice, and reportedly announced, "We'll make a Bunker Hill of it," which, if you're keeping score, is exactly the sort of thing you don't say when tensions are high. Pickett wants to plant the American flag and dare the British to do something about it. Subtlety, not really in his vocabulary. Meanwhile, across the channel, the British Navy's response is swift. 3 warships anchor off the island. Marines land in clean boots. Their commander, Rear Admiral Robert Baines, is handed a difficult choice: arrest the American farmers' fire on their military camp, or do nothing and look weak. His underlings push for a show of strength. After all, no empire wants to be outdone by potatoes and small arms. But Baines pauses. He walks the muddy ground, studies the terrain, talks to his officers, and decides that starting a war over a pig might be, diplomatically speaking, a bit much. He sends back word that he refuses to fire the first shot. Historians still argue whether Baines's refusal was a masterstroke of peacekeeping or just fear of another 1812-style quagmire. But the result is the same: the gunpowder stays dry. And the men, well, they keep waiting. Back in Washington, D.C., and London officials are alarmed. The headlines trickle in, slowly, often misquoted, sometimes comically distorted. American militia face down British Navy over hog is one version. Another reads border incident escalates warships circle over pig dispute. Public reaction ranges from eye rolls to genuine concern. Politicians, ever eager to avoid a costly international conflict, especially one sparked by livestock, begin pressing for negotiation. But on the ground here where you stand, it's personal. You walk past soldiers darning socks beside loaded rifles. The Americans have dug in, confident in their claim. The British equally resolute with better coats. Both sides have orders to not shoot first. But both also have standing orders to defend their flag. That, as you know, is the kind of paradox that starts wars by accident. The pig, of course, has long since been buried quietly, without ceremony, under an apple tree. Its grave remains unmarked. A curious fox sniffs the ground nearby, oblivious to the paperwork and powdered wigs its demise has triggered. In your pocket, you carry a note, scribbled by one American officer: "May God preserve us from a war of folly." That's the mood now, equal parts fear and farce. You glance at the mist-covered woods, and somewhere beyond the ridge, a British fife whistles faintly. The Americans answer with a bugle call. They're not aiming at each other yet. But the island has changed. No longer just a disputed landmass, it has become something symbolic, a proving ground, a stage. And somewhere behind all the saber-rattling and stoic gazes, everyone knows: one false step, one drunk guard, one misheard command. And this whole silly standoff might erupt into something no one wanted, all because of one very unlucky pig. You wake to the smell of damp canvas and burnt coffee, the kind that's been boiled too many times and tastes like regret. The American camp is bustling before dawn. Soldiers tending horses, mending boots, polishing muskets they hope they'll never need to fire. Across the island, British troops are doing much the same, their red tunics sharp against the sea-grey sky. The pig is long gone, but its ghost lingers in every patrol route and cannon emplacement. The island feels less like farmland now and more like a slow-motion theatre of war. You walk a ridge trail near the American fort, which is less fort and more stubborn pile of tents. The ground is churned from heavy boots and wheel ruts, and the makeshift defences include a couple of hastily built earthworks that seem more symbolic than strategic. Captain Pickett, ever dramatic, strides between positions, inspecting everything with theatrical flair. "We will hold this island," he announces to anyone who will listen, though it's not exactly clear who's attacking. The British aren't idle either. Rear Admiral Baines has parked 3 fully armed warships offshore, their dark hulls looming like patient predators. Their gun ports stare at the coastline. Onshore, Royal Marines dig shallow trenches and set up camp in neat, disciplined rows. British engineers are said to be scouting higher ground just in case. A foghorn moans in the distance, like the island itself is sighing. It's July now, the sheep seem confused. The odd part. Despite the tension, there's no open fighting. Soldiers from both sides sometimes cross paths in the island's woods, or while foraging for fresh berries or fetching water from the same stream. More than once you overhear an American offering tobacco to a British private. Once you see a British officer raise a flask toward an American corporal who toasts back with his tin mug. If there's going to be bloodshed, no one's eager to be first. Still, the preparations intensify. The Americans begin moving artillery up a hillock they now call Battery Point. The cannons are small, mostly 6-pounders hauled up by hand and mule. They're pointed at the British anchorage, not because anyone expects to use them, but because not having them there would look weak. Image is everything. Historians still debate whether either side actually had orders to fire in defense or if they were simply performing a choreographed dance of deterrence. What's clear is that neither London nor Washington wanted a real war, not over this. Not with other fires burning elsewhere in the world, but the men on the ground. They're walking a tightrope strung between nationalism and impulse. One evening, you sit near a campfire listening to American troops share stories about previous skirmishes in Oregon. "We're always dancing with the Brits," one says, poking at the fire. "This time, we've got better boots." A few laugh, but their eyes dart nervously toward the tree line. Across the island, a British sentry patrols a beach where kelp coils like shipwrecked rope. He scribbles in his journal by lamplight. "We've no desire for war," he writes. "But there's honor at stake. And that pig blast, it seems to have been the island's governor all along." During one tense afternoon, you witness both camps scrambling as a rumor spreads. Someone saw movement in the woods, might have been a patrol, might have been deer. Muskets are shouldered, bugles sound, officers shout, tension pulses like a drumbeat. Then, nothing. Just silence, save for the cry of a distant gull and the wind brushing the pines. Everyone stands down. Again. At this point, the island's natural beauty has become an ironic backdrop to what feels like absurdist theatre. Lavender fields bloom near cannon placements. Wild roses grow beside piles of musket shot. The sheep continue their grazing tour, utterly indifferent to geopolitical lines, and still no one fires. Yet something about this strange stillness is more unnerving than open war. You begin to sense that what's really happening here isn't about military readiness, but about theatre, both sides performing strength for each other and their capitals, hoping someone blinks before someone dies. It's a battle of wills, waged with polished boots and tightly folded maps. You hike up to a lookout point. The sun dips low. The British ships below look almost golden in the evening light. The American camp sends up wisps of smoke. Between the two, the forest waits. The island doesn't care who owns it. But history does, and so the standoff stretches on, not a shot fired, not yet. You rise with the clatter of tin cups and the distant thump of marching boots. The fog is thick again, rolling across San Juan Island like a blanket trying to smother whatever ambitions remain. But ambitions, as always, persist. At the heart of the American camp, Captain George Pickett is still holding court like a man auditioning for destiny. His voice booms over the murmurs of his men, and even the sheep nearby seem slightly more disciplined when he walks past. Pickett is a fascinating figure, equal parts confidence and chaos. He graduated last in his class at West Point, which, depending on how you look at it, means either he barely made it, or was the very best at being the very worst. And while most will remember him years from now for a tragic, futile charge at Gettysburg, right now, he's all moustache, bravado, and manifest destiny. You watch him address his officer's arms folded behind his back boots, polished despite the mud. "This island belongs to the United States," he declares, "and no redcoat's gonna tell me otherwise." It's the kind of line you'd expect from a stage play, and Pickett, well, he seems to think he's the star. He requests reinforcements, he sends urgent dispatches to his superiors, he threatens to fire on any British troops that set foot on the American half of the island. That last part, not just posturing. Soon, more American soldiers arrive, reinforcements from the mainland, pushing the total garrison to nearly 500. The British, not to be outdone, boost their own numbers. Marines are rotated in Navy cutters, patrol the waters, and the HMS Plumper drops anchor a bit closer than etiquette suggests. You're watching this like a theatre critic waiting for the second act twist. Everyone has now dug in, built up, and doubled down, yet not a shot has been fired. Then something changes. A message arrives from Washington. U.S. General Winfield Scott, hero of the Mexican-American War, and a towering figure in American military circles, is en route. President Buchanan, increasingly concerned that a conflict over a pig could spiral into something profoundly Stupid sends Scott with full authority to de-escalate. His orders: bring this mess back from the brink. Scott is elderly now, his bones creaky, his uniform a little too tight, but his mind still sharp as ever. You meet him when he arrives in the late summer of 1859, stepping off the boat with a look that says, "You boys have made quite the mess, haven't you?" He meets with Pickett first. The conversation is polite but firm. Pickett pushes for full military control of the island. Scott pushes back harder. "Will not start a war over a hog," he says, according to one account. Then he crosses the channel and meets with the British. There he finds Rear Admiral Baines and Governor James Douglas, a man who's been watching this slow-motion train wreck with a clenched jaw and a stack of diplomatic letters on his desk. Baines reiterates his earlier stance: he won't start a war over a pig. But if the Americans attack first, the full might of the British Empire will respond. Historians still argue whether Scott's arrival was what truly stopped the escalation, or whether the threat of London and Washington stepping in had already cooled tempers. But something about Scott, his stature, his calm, his clarity, seems to break the fever. After a few tense days, an agreement is reached. Both sides will remain on the island, but in limited numbers, a joint occupation, equal rights, equal presence, no new forts, no new provocations. The Americans will reduce their forces to a symbolic detachment of around 100 men. The British will do the same. No more cannon posturing, no more picket speeches. You walk past Pickett that evening. He's scowling. He wanted a dramatic stand, maybe even a small victory. Instead, he's been given compromise, and history's going to remember him for much louder failures. Across the island, the tone shifts. There's still tension, but the sharp edge has dulled. Soldiers on both sides are told to stand down. No drills near the border, no insults, no wandering sheep treated as espionage. It's as if the whole island exhales for the first time in weeks. The most telling moment comes days later. You watch a group of American soldiers and British Marines meet at the stream again. But this time they talk, they laugh. Someone produces a bottle. A British corporal teaches an American private how to curse in Scottish Gaelic. And the island for the moment returns to the sound of water wind and the occasional snort of a sheep who still doesn't care. The war, it seems, has been postponed indefinitely. The mornings grow quieter now, even as the island remains divided. The threat of war has retreated like the tide, still present, but distant, its footprints vanishing in the wet sand. You walk through the American camp, smaller now, more relaxed. Gone are the rows of hastily primed cannons and the tension you could taste in the air. In their place, routine caution and a curious sense of shared space. Across the island, the British camp mirrors this shift. Their redcoats still shine and the Navy ships still bob offshore like silent witnesses, but the mood has softened. The men know this is no longer a battlefield, it's a waiting room, kind of limbo with sheep. Rear Admiral Baines, now somewhat of a local legend for his stubborn patience, patrols the deck of the Tribune, his flagship with a monocle fixed and a journal always nearby. He writes that prudence must guide our course, a polite way of saying, let's not shoot anyone over livestock. Governor James Douglas, meanwhile, stays behind the scenes exchanging stiff letters with London and wondering whether imperial politics ever get easier. Spoiler, they don't. The Americans, for their part, have sent Pickett packing. He's been replaced by less theatrical commanders, men more interested in holding the line than making headlines. The joint occupation is formalized with astonishing delicacy. Each side agrees to keep 100 men on the island, no more, no less. They choose separate camps on opposite ends of the island, like grumpy neighbors who've learned to ignore each other through polite nods and sheer willpower. You visit both camps. In the American one, soldiers plant vegetable gardens and pass the time carving chess pieces. They send letters home filled with sheep jokes and complaints about the island's unpredictable rain. This place is more pasture than post, one writes, but I suppose that's better than bullets. The British camp is cleaner tea served at precise times, uniforms brushed even during downpours. You watch a sergeant arrange musket drills like ballet choreography. But you also see laughter here. A cricket game breaks out one afternoon using a bent stick and a surprisingly fast coconut. A cheering squad of Marines and sheep gathers near the edge of the field. Something odd begins to happen. The men, those once bracing for war, start to visit one another, carefully at first. One American corporal crosses into British territory carrying a letter misdelivered by boat. The next day, a British private visits the American mess tent and leaves with a slice of cherry pie. Soon it becomes routine. Exchanging newspapers, sharing tobacco, trading boots. Someone organizes a Christmas dinner and both sides attend. There are still rules, of course, lines that shouldn't be crossed. Officers remain wary, but the island is no longer a powder keg. It's an unusually polite standoff with a dash of community. Historians still argue over how unique this arrangement really was. Was it a masterpiece of ad hoc diplomacy, or just two governments too embarrassed to admit they didn't have a plan? Either way, it worked. San Juan Island became a case study in conflict almost happening. An anomaly, a time when restraint beat impulse, and pigs became punchlines instead of casualties. But the larger question, who owns this island, still hangs unanswered. Both the United States and Great Britain claim it, and neither is willing to back down. Treaties remain vague, maps remain contradictory. Cartographers groan, politicians stall, so the soldiers wait. You take a walk one foggy evening, the kind where every tree looks like a person and every sheep sounds like a ghost. As you approach the midpoint of the island, you hear music drifting through the mist, fiddle from the American camp, maybe a flute from the British. Two melodies, two camps, one ridiculous slice of geopolitical tension still hanging in the Pacific air. And the pig, no memorial, no statue. Just an unmarked grave and a legacy that grew far larger than its muddy footprint. 12 years. That's how long the joint occupation endures. Longer than most marriages, longer than some wars, and certainly longer than anyone expected a pig-related dispute to stay relevant. You return to San Juan Island as the 1860s wear on, and what you find is not a military outpost, but something more surreal, a coexistence. American and British camps still fly their respective flags, but the atmosphere is more summer camp than standoff. The soldiers have settled into a rhythm, they farm, they fish, they occasionally race each other's horses for amusement. The fog still rolls in like clockwork, and the sheep continue their endless chew, but the tension that once clung to the island has worn down into something resembling neighborly tolerance. You sit by a communal fire one evening, yes, communal, where men from both sides pass around a flask of something strong and unofficial. A British sergeant sings a bawdy sea shanty. An American corporal responds with a banjo tune that's slightly off-key but enthusiastically received. You begin to suspect this is the most peaceful international military entanglement in recorded history. Every now and then a dispute flares up, a misplaced cow, a broken fence, an argument over who borrowed whose shovel. But these squabbles are handled locally with a level of eye-rolling pragmatism you wouldn't expect from two military powers sharing a disputed island. One memorable incident involves a British soldier swiping a pie from an American windowsill. Instead of a diplomatic crisis, it ends with an apology, a handshake, and a recipe exchange. Historians still debate what made this unusual arrangement work so well. Was it the professionalism of the officers, the shared language and customs, or the fact that both sides, while proud, were simply too far from their capitals to be micromanaged? Whatever the reason, the soldiers on San Juan proved that peace once chosen is astonishingly easy to maintain even without clear borders. But back in the centers of power, the question of sovereignty remains unresolved. Washington and London distracted by other affairs, the Civil War for the US imperial entanglements for Britain leaves San Juan to its own odd little limbo. Periodically, discussions resume, letters are exchanged, maps are re-examined, but the issue always slips back into the diplomatic drawer labeled later. Meanwhile, the island begins to grow. Civilian life returns. More settlers arrive, some American, some British. They build schools, open shops, and plant orchards. The communities are small but resilient. Children grow up hearing stories about the pig war, except it never actually became a war, so even the name is confusing. Tourists begin to trickle in. Journalists write bemused accounts of the two-camp system. One popular American newspaper calls it the island where everyone's armed and no one's angry. It's not far off. You walk a trail near the dividing line and come across a handmade sign Joint use area, no grazing disputes beyond this point. Below it, someone has scratched pigs not allowed. You chuckle. The humor has survived just like everything else here. There are other stories too, smaller, stranger ones, like the time a visiting botanist accidentally caused an international misunderstanding by referring to a local flower by its British name instead of its American one. Or the annual tug-of-war between the two camps eventually declared a neutral contest of morale. No one remembers who won the most matches, they just remember the laughter. What's clear now is that the island has become a living paradox, a place defined by conflict, yet utterly devoid of violence. It has weathered bureaucracy near bravado and a healthy helping of absurdity, and somehow that has made it stronger. But time marches on. You begin to feel it in the faces of the soldiers, older now, more lined, more settled. Some are rotated out, replaced by younger men who arrive confused and leave with inside jokes and homemade jam. There's a rhythm to it now, an unspoken agreement to let the lawyers and lords figure it out someday. And finally, after 12 years of this awkward dance that someday arrives, both governments, having finally grown weary of the long-distance ambiguity, agree to submit the San Juan question to arbitration. And not just any arbitration, but international arbitration. For the first time in history, two global powers agree to let a third party settle a territorial dispute, not by war or treaty, but by impartial judgment. And who do they ask to decide? A man with a mustache, a monocle, and a mustache so powerful it may have swayed international law. They choose Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany. Yes, that Germany. But that's a story for next section. It's 1871 now, and you've grown accustomed to the island's peculiar silence, and the same trees sway in the same wind, the same sheep amble along the same trails, and the same two flags flutter on opposite ends of the same lonely island. But in the capitals, Washington, London, Berlin, change is in motion, and at the center of it all sits an unlikely referee, Kaiser Wilhelm III, newly crowned emperor of the German Empire. Yes, after 12 years of muttered grievances and polite standoffs, the United States and Great Britain have finally agreed to do what many believe should have been done in the first place: ask someone else to settle it. You find yourself picturing the Kaiser hunched over a bundle of maps in his palace, possibly trying to understand why two supposedly reasonable nations need his help to decide who gets custody of an island where the most consistent population is livestock. Historians still argue whether he took the case seriously from the start or simply thought it a convenient distraction from Bismarck's endless scheming. The arbitration process begins in Geneva because of course it does. Neutral, picturesque, and filled with diplomats who wear waistcoats like armor. A three-person commission is formed, one German, one American, one British, and they begin sorting through every crumb of documentation the two nations have hoarded since 1846. You imagine them sighing as they reread the vague line in the Oregon Treaty, the middle of the channel, a phrase that has launched more arguments than any pig ever could. Maps are pored over, naval logs examine, testimonies weighed. The British argue that the boundary should follow Rosario Strait, making San Juan theirs. The Americans argue for Haro Strait, which would award them the island. And the Kaiser, he considers. And finally, in 1872, the verdict comes down. The boundary the Kaiser rules should follow the Haro Strait. San Juan Island belongs to the United States. Just like that, after 26 years of disputed ownership, 12 years of joint occupation, and one very famous pig, the matter is settled, with neither a shot fired nor a treaty shredded. Back on the island, the decision is met with relief, and perhaps a hint of sadness. The British pack their things. Soldiers fold their flags, disassemble their tents, and prepare to sail home. It's all very polite. The Americans, now sole custodians of the island, shake hands with the departing redcoats. Some exchange addresses. A few share a final drink. You watch the last British ship disappear into the grey mist, its wake slowly swallowed by the sea. Just like that, an era ends. And San Juan settles back into itself. The fields grow quiet again. The sheep reclaim their authority. The American flag flaps lazily in the salt air. Tourists will one day come snapping photos of old barracks and listening to tales of the pig war with polite disbelief. But for now you sit beneath the shade of a cedar tree near the edge of the former British camp. The spot is peaceful, the breeze gentle. Nothing stirs but the leaves and maybe, if you close your eyes, the faint grunt of a pig, somewhere in the beyond content, possibly, amused, certainly unaware that its untimely appetite once shaped the fate of nations. And that's the legacy. No heroes, no martyrs, no blood. Just a pig, a potato patch, a handful of stubborn men, and the remarkable restraint of everyone who could have made it worse, but didn't. So now you drift. Let the island fade behind you, its rolling hills and quiet trails softening into memory. The flags no longer matter. The soldiers have long gone home. The cannons rust in silence and the maps lie folded in drawers nobody opens anymore. All that remains is the story. The fog still rolls in over San Juan like a sigh, blanketing the earth in the kind of hush only time can bring. You hear nothing now but the gentle lap of the tide and the whisper of the trees above. Even the sheep, once unwitting witnesses to an empire's indecision, are still. Let yourself settle into that stillness. Let your breath match the rhythm of waves you can't quite see, but know are there. No need to worry over borders or proclamations. No need to wonder who was right or which channel mattered more. Because sometimes the world's strangest stories don't end with thunder. They end in a quiet compromise, an unmarked grave beneath an apple tree, and the knowledge that peace, even absurd peace, is still peace. And if you ever find yourself worrying that the world has gone too far, that foolishness always leads to fire, remember San Juan. Remember the pig. And remember that once, not so long ago, two nations almost went to war, but didn't. Now sleep comes easy. You're far from the tents, far from the maps, just drifting. Good night.